welcome to Raw Food. That is
Welcome
a whole
to Raw
separate
Food.
conversation we could have, because especially if it is so fucking easy to blow up right now if you just pick a side of a culture war and you play the role of designated black or brown friend that tells white people what they want to hear.
And
either
that's
on the
not
far
what we're
left
doing.
or the far right. They're hiring. You want a job right now. You want to get written about. You want blogs. You want to get on TV. Just go be Candace Owens again, or just go be
the articulate
idiot.
Right. And that is not the purpose of our discussions. The purpose of our discussions from the start, when we were students at Cal Berkeley, was to have engaged critical thinking that informs a healthy dialogue that doesn't have to agree. And I think part of what's missing in our social dialogues these days is the critical thinking piece. So I appreciate these conversations that you and I have had for over a decade now, and our circle of friends, I would say, from the Berkeley era, who were all committed to critical thinking despite coming from different majors and backgrounds and cultures and all kinds of things. One of the things I did appreciate about that experience was the commitment to critically thinking things through before spouting an opinion. So that's our goal through our conversations, to finally have a conversation worth its weight in salt. And to your point, not just being reactive or trying to trigger cultural wars just to get attention. Dumb. Mm-hmm. So today's purpose, one of the topics you have been adamant that we discussed was the Harvard legacy findings. So Harvard Institute did a research project on its connection to slavery, and the findings were interesting. I was not the least bit shocked, surprised, or appalled. Jay, you want to speak a little bit to the Harvard report before we jump into the material?
Harvard's is thought of as one of the leading institutions in the world. And the school is older than the country that it is in. Okay. And it has an endowment. It has one of the largest, if not the largest, endowment in the US. And you don't get that much money. Their endowment is more than $30 billion at this point for a school that has, just around 10,000 people, graduate and undergraduate. You don't get that. It might be definitely no more than like 14,000. You don't get that level of generational wealth that just compounds over almost 400 years. You don't get that level without having your hand in all of the things that make money. And slavery and all of the ancillary industries of slavery made a fuck ton of money throughout the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. And then sharecropping, and still does even today.
Prison slave labor, but that's not the topic at hand. We can do trafficking, a discussion connecting the findings to the current prison attendee list.
Yep. The whole industrial complex within
the whole industrial complex and its ties. I mean, again, you and I can have that conversation asleep, but it's important, I think, as a history major, to always put these topics into context so that people can understand the timeline, people can understand the connection, and you can also understand the multi-layered intricacies of what we know as America and its founding on, on its founding economy based on slavery. So jumping right into it, just to give the broad strokes, because the findings were, pretty deep and significant. There has been numerous discussions on it and debates discussing the findings. So I'll just give you some of the main broad strokes, and then we can discuss relevance and importance of it from a non-political standpoint, because this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is just American history. And this is what happened. And that's what we're here to discuss. So I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind when we have the discussion, Jay, is that Harvard is not alone in this. It's not like every other institution at the time was the beacon of freedom and had some kind of monopoly on a moral high compass. They didn't. These findings are similar across Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown, Rutgers, Williams. All of those universities benefited and evolved. Not just benefited, but continued its growth and evolution to the institutions that they are today due to their ties to slavery. Mm-hmm. One of the things that needs to be kept in mind when we have this discussion is that Harvard was not a bystander to slavery. It was not slavery adjacent. It wasn't like, oh, look over there. I can't believe those people are doing that. They actively participated and maintained slavery. And what is even probably more important to understand is that the founding of that school and its theologies still bleed into the studies of students there today. But we can get into that. So it's important to understand, like I said, it's not just Harvard alone, but we're going to use Harvard because they're the ones who released their report on it, which really came out on the heels of Brown University doing a similar study and releasing its findings, I think, in the late either 1990s or early 2000s. So Harvard basically did a comparison of itself to Brown's University's findings, which is the catalyst for the Harvard study. One of the things that's important to note is that slavery did not just occur in the South, it was thriving in the North. And I think that's one of the highlights of the study, is to show how relevant the North was in keeping slavery going. It wasn't like if you escaped from the South and went to the North, you were now free. This was not Kansas, and you were not walking down the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz. You were fucked in the North, just in a different way. So pretty much Harvard was founded, I believe, in 1636, which is within 2 decades of 1619, when the first slaves were brought to the United States. So Harvard had its dick stuck in slavery from its own founding. And from the start, there is written documentation that confirms there was at least one male slave living on the campus, only referred to in literary work as the Moor. And I mean, don't even get me started. The mole.
Oh my God.
And the importance of this relates to the slave trade in 2 ways. At the time, this was at the tail's end of the Pequot War, where the Puritans fought the Indians in southern Connecticut and basically like stole their land. Mm-hmm. And the Pequot slave trade also helped continue the slave trade outside of the colonies, but into the West Indies, where cotton, tobacco, sugar was advantageous to develop for plantation owners here in America. So a lot of slavery that occurred in the Caribbean, that wealth was transferred back to the colonies, where masters and plantation owners were able to build their land ownership and their wealth here. Mm-hmm. So when this slave trade occurred in the West Indies, one of the ships returned from the West Indies with enslaved Africans. And we believe that that's the starting point of the documented note of the Moor being on campus. Also, this wasn't a one-off. We know, based on Harvard's own findings, that at least 5 Harvard presidents had continued economic ties to the South and to the West Indies, particularly during the 18th century when the slave trade was at its peak. Mm-hmm. So the presidents of Harvard, at least half a dozen of them, were all family members of merchant traders. And the merchant traders were the ones responsible for making sure that the slave trade continued and thrived between the colonies and the West Indies. Mm-hmm. So
and they're getting paid for all that.
Oh yeah, everybody's making money.
Yeah, be like, oh, hey, I was just running the boat. No,
yeah,
you're you're
complicit
to load this boat up with slaves and bring it somewhere else.
Absolutely. This is not a one-off. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't a random, okay, let's just do this one deal. There was a continued effort under half a dozen Harvard presidents who all hailed from trading families to uphold slavery even after it ended. So even after slavery ends in the North, one of the businesses that continues supplying the South with laborers are universities. Mm-hmm. So before the peak of the slave trade, there were only 3 college universities that were doing well. There were almost 70 that had opened up, but had collapsed. Colleges and universities tripled between 1746 and 1769 from 3 to 9 colleges. It's not an accident that universities triple at the same time there's the height of the slave trade, meaning when the slave trade was at its economic peak, the universities multiplied. Meaning that there is a direct correlation between an uptick in the economic mobility that plantation owners were going through. And a lot of those owners started donating land to universities. Mm-hmm. So Harvard is one of those benefactors of land ownership from a royal family who had investments here, bought land from slavery money, and then donated that land to universities, one of them being Harvard.
Now, which royal family? The British royal family, or a family that was linked?
They're called the Royals. The one specific person is named Isaac Royals, who made money off sugar plantations. He owned 700 acres of land in the 18th century. So because of this relationship between white males who attended universities, white male land ownership, white males owning slaves, they were able to reap the benefits of this in a bunch of different ways. So they benefit off of sheer labor. There is at least 70 documented Black people that were owned by either Harvard leadership, presidents, staff, and faculty from the founding of the university all the way up to 1783, when slavery was made unlawful, specifically in Massachusetts. But that doesn't stop the slave trade there, nor does that stop Harvard's involvement in it. Because they benefited so much from the slave labor, they continue to trade slaves back and forth from the West Indies to the plantations in Massachusetts. So seeing slaves on the campus was part of the daily life for students at that time. So the New England economy is literally in bed and completely tied to the South and the Caribbean, because those investments in the plantation sector in the Caribbean is money that's used in the colonies. So Isaac Royal is one of those people who benefited from the slave trade. He donates some of the 700 acres of land that his family owns to Harvard, which Harvard sells to endow their first professorship at the school. Mm-hmm. That land is also the same land that Harvard Law School is built on. And then the law school, the business schools, and the medical schools, the theologies are all based on the economic experience of the people of those times. So not only did they participate in the slave trade from an economic standpoint, from a theological standpoint, they also created the rhetoric that made slavery morally, ethically, and legally okay.
Right, because these are all
and then that was preached in their law schools.
Right, exactly.
And in their business schools.
These are all, and it's not just like this is just some back alley where they're teaching these things. This is Harvard has always been Harvard. It is the premier university, and it has been for centuries. And so the thought leadership that's coming from there is also meant to undergird, to support the structure that helped them make all their fucking money in the first place. And so it's this virtuous cycle where we got land from people who own slaves, and then we're going to endow professorships with that land, and with that, we're going to sell some of that land to endow a professorship. We're going to bring these professors in, and they're going to teach that all of this shit is okay. And now all the next generation of leaders that just got their fancy Harvard degrees are going to go out and spread that message as well. And then
not only are they going to go out and spread that message
back.
And not only are they going to go out and spread that message, they're going to go out and become plantation owners themselves, right? Because now they're educated, they're successful, they're wealthy. And now they have the scientific and legal authority, or so they think, to treat their slaves the way they treat them, because now they have these theologians basically telling them across a bunch of different professions that slavery is okay.
Right.
Here's why it's okay legally.
Was very much a part of everything at that point. And yes. Harvard has a leading seminary school as well, which is where Dr. Martin Luther King got his PhD from.
Absolutely. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it's the Divinity School professorship that is the first professorship born from land sold that was donated to them by a plantation owner.
That's some shit.
And then speaking to how it bleeds into the actual subject matter and curriculum, one of the things that, as you just discussed, was highlighted and imported into the curriculum are eugenics and racial bias through science.
Of course.
So there is a professor named Louis Agassiz, who was from Switzerland, who does a comparative anatomy studies. Basically, he is one of the forefathers of eugenics. He believed major progenitors of races being separate species, he purported that God created 5 different Adam and Eves. So each race has its own version of Adam and Eve. And he believed in a racial hierarchy where whites were on top and blacks were on the bottom.
Of course he did.
Another example of this is the fact that one of the things that highlighted wealth of universities was actually how many bodies or corpses they owned at the time. So, for example, one of the slaves that was bought, right.
It's a flex.
It was exactly how you flex. Like, look how many dead black bodies I have. Well, look how many dead black bodies I have. Well, look how many we have sewn together. I'm not even making this up. I mean, these are the findings from Harvard. One such example is that of a young black boy named Sturman. He was a 17-year-old exhibit creature, for lack of better terms. He was kidnapped from Africa and brought to New England as an exhibition. And he and several other black people were forced to dress up as caricatures of Africans. So they had to run around in like a leopard print and spears, like imagine, Tarzan, but in the 18th century. Mm-hmm. And after, years of this abuse, he hung himself. And to double down on the disregard for the black body, his body was donated to Harvard, where it was dissected, and his remains are in the Harvard Peabody Museum collection, I believe, to this day, in the care of Professor Agassiz, one of the proponents of eugenics. And using his body, he measured Sturman and said that the measurements on Sturman proved that he was somewhere between whites and apes. And his body was basically, even in his death, used to prove his own inferiority and justification for slavery. And that inequality was embedded in the Harvard curriculum. So in the 1850s, when Harvard Medical School tries to desegregate, of course, there is massive pushback because the white male student body did not think that they should be subjected to going to school with non-equals being the black people that they are experimenting on and studying for the purposes of medical and economical growth. So so the students basically protest black people going to the school. Mm-hmm. I believe at the time it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, who is the professor of anatomy and dean of medical school at the time, who caves to the pressure of the students. So the 3 black men that were admitted, one of which was Martin Delany, a very famous black abolitionist, and also 2 other local students, were then expelled from the university after being admitted because of the backlash from the white students. And to this day, because of that backlash, Harvard still has one of the lowest rates of letting in black people.
And nowadays, if you get into Harvard for anything, med school or whatever, I'm just going to say you got in for affirmative action anyway.
Right. So one of the legacies
while white people had affirmative action at Harvard for literally centuries.
Right. I mean, and still do. Through legacy, through sports.
That's the real affirmative action.
That's the real affirmative action, is through legacy. But I guess we're not ready to talk about that. And it's also important to keep in mind, though, that while all this was going on, there was always an abolitionist movement. It's not like black people tolerated this. And then 20 years later, Martin Luther King was born and was like, we hate this. Since the first black slave was brought to this country, the first freedom fighter was formed. And one of those freedom fighters was W.E. Du Bois, the French would say Dubois, who is one of the Harvard graduates and very profound African-American philosopher, author, and the co-founder of the Niagara Movement, which is the precursor to the NAACP. Mm-hmm. And his work, along with Charles Hamilton Houston and Beatrice Dykes, leads to the fall of Jim Crow, because I believe, if I remember correctly, Charles Houston does a precursor law case before Brown versus Board, which is the desegregation of schools. Mm. And they also had white allies as well. There was a German professor at Harvard named Charles Fallon, who was considered a rebel. He was chased out of Germany for being too radical. Comes to Harvard, becomes a professor, and aligns himself with the abolitionists. But due to all the plantation-owning families who donated to the school and had children attending the school, he was forced out. To this day, two of the largest donors to the school is the Livingston family, which is the largest slave trading family in New York, rivaled only by slave trading families who come from Rhode Island and New Jersey. And the second largest slave trading family was the DeWolf family. So these are the families that no one ever hears of in America. Their name is not in mainstream public, and yet, they're as old as the Rockefellers.
Right.
And
they didn't go into politics.
They didn't go into politics because they didn't have to. They already had the money, the wealth, and the access to the resources. Mm-hmm. They already influenced the ideologies and theologies that people who have attended these universities have studied for 7 generations. So there's no need to go into politics when you hold the pen to the books that the politicians are studying, right? If you're writing the laws, there's no need for you to also come down from the mountaintop and follow them. So similarly, Princeton has a very similar background. They started off a very rocky school. They did not have immediate funding until they also get involved into the slave trade. And it's through Princeton that the Scottish network is built. Now, we got to remember there was a Scottish Enlightenment period. A lot of our theology and our philosophy was based on the findings and the works of Scottish writers. It's important to note that the Ku Klux Klan was started by Scottish Americans after the war. So there was a rich history between religious radicals of Scottish descent and racism in this country. There was the Scottish diaspora that spread out throughout the colonies, up to and including the backwoods of the Carolinas. And similarly to Harvard, looked for resources and money in the South. So they also were a proponent of race science. They also used dead Black bodies for research. A lot of our medical findings to this day comes from the experimentation that went on with Black bodies, alive and dead. This perpetuates the ideas that come to defend slavery. It gives it an intellectual legitimacy, and it gives it a scientific credential because these are the scientific findings from one of the most elite universities at the time. And this funding also gives rise to more schools, law schools, business schools, because these were institutions that were using the funding from slavery to basically build the theology to keep slavery going. And this is in the North. So
emphasize that one more time.
This is
all in the North.
This is all in the North, by the way. So what we know regarding dissections of the body, medical surgeries, what we know about anesthesia, what we know about pain, thresholds of pain, all come from the experimentation of Blacks, which was replicated by the Nazis during the Holocaust, because they experimented on Jews, and they actually continued those experiments, the Nazis, when they fled, many of whom who were never prosecuted, but were allowed legally to leave the country and continue their medical research in colonies like Chile and Argentina, colonies that exist to this day. Mm-hmm. So those are the broad strokes of what I gathered from the Harvard report. What are your thoughts on those findings, Jay?
Well, first, I want to make sure I got my numbers right. Should have checked earlier, but yeah, that $30 billion figure for the endowment, yeah, it's actually 53.2.
Oh,
which is crazy growth because their endowment was 30 not that long ago.
Right.
Student body is actually now 19,218 due to having 14,000 postgrad students. So it just reflects even more of this, again, the impact of having this much wealth to start with before, slavery finally ends and there's no way to make any more money off of it. But if you have all of this money at that point in time, at the beginning of the 1900s, then, the beginning of the 20th century, as we move into the Industrial Revolution, as we move into, technology and everything, you are going to make so much more fucking money. And then you have that continued virtuous cycle of rich people coming to your school, getting indoctrinated on believing that everything that they've done up until now is totally fine.
Indoctrinated is the right word.
Yeah. And then they go forth, they go out, they're successful, and they donate back.
Right. And the cycle continued.
And it just continued and continued and continued. And thank you for also putting into the broader historical context of the fact that there weren't that many universities back then, and almost all of them were startups that failed. Put them in the context of like companies.
Right.
Several of these startup universities, in air quotes, failed. And it wasn't
the ones involved in the slave trade
making a
didn't.
fuck ton of money with slavery that they actually had enough money to keep these universities going.
Yes. And that's exactly what the findings say, is that basically the funding from slavery is what kept these universities going when others failed and gave them the money to remain elite for decades to come. There is nothing that will pay you more than free labor.
Yeah. And I hate the idea of, oh, well, it's kind of like indentured servitude because they could, and indentured servitude is also fucked up. But, oh, well, because, they're getting a free place to live and free food or whatever. Dude, they got shitty. They lived in absolute squalor. Okay. Mm-hmm. They were given.
The living conditions were horrible. Yeah, they were horrible because the rich wanted to make sure that indentured slaves didn't get too comfortable.
Yeah.
So they didn't want them staying long in those conditions. So they made it's almost similar to homeless shelters. They make it unlivable so that you won't stay there because they do not want to apply their resources to it. It's a waste.
Yeah. And then your actual slaves, they're living in absolute squalor, and they're getting literally the worst food, which is why even still today, things like chitlins are considered like African-American cuisine, when that was literally just the pig intestines that the white folks would not use when they ate. And so here, we're not going to use this, it's already pig. All right. We're going to take the meat. You can have the intestines because we're not going to eat it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So let's not pretend like there was some kind of benevolence with slavery because they're getting a free place to live. And
right. And it wasn't free.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't free.
It wasn't free. And also, they weren't allowed to leave ever. They did not make the choice to begin this type of arrangement, to put it in its most, positive sense. And they were never allowed to leave. And then their families were broken up, and they were punished brutally for the slightest fuck ups. Even it shouldn't even say fuck up. They were punished brutally at the whim of these of their masters, and they didn't need a fucking reason.
It's absolutely true. And the punishments were so egregious to make sure that uprisings and escapees were at a minimal, that they decapitated people. They hung their heads publicly on spears. They lynched them. They burnt them alive. They raped them, some of them publicly, to humiliate them, particularly some of the Black men, so that they would not be respected as men in front of their families. Let me tell you something. You can talk to me about forgiveness until the cows come home. I will never fucking forgive these people. That's what the people who are in the business of forgiveness are in the business of doing. They can go right ahead and forgive whoever they need to forgive. I don't forgive these people. This was calculated. This was meaningful. This was thoughtful. This was mindful. There was absolutely no doubt in their minds that we were not to be successful, that we were not to be seen as equal, that we were not to be seen as human. And honestly, I think we're out. It's mental illness to think that we're ever going to change the minds of these people. I'm done with the marching. You will very rarely catch me at a march going forward. The only thing that makes for meaningful change in our communities is economic self-sufficiency. Once you're able to make money for yourself without relying on any of these people, then we've got a chance. We can't be protesting the same people we're sending our resumes to. It's schizophrenic on both parts. And it doesn't force any of these institutions to have to change any of their ways, because at the end of the day, they know we're coming to them for our bread and butter. If we remove ourselves from the equation and create our own economy enough to impact theirs, now we've got some power. Until that moment comes, for me personally, everything else is supplemental and arguably performative.
I do agree with you there, that a lot of this shit is very much performative. I think there's an interesting rhyme how history repeats, it rhymes. There's some interesting poetry, if you will, to the fact that the first Black president came from this university, and literally, like, without having a degree from Harvard, he would not have been able to be president, without having been a successful, student at Harvard Law, and also, being, the first Black person to be the editor of the Harvard Law Review. He wouldn't have been,
Correct.
He would not have been thought of as worthy.
Or had he been born from the descendant of an American slave. I mean, there is an argument that the Black people who seem to reach the highest echelons of power, like Kamala and Obama, are not African American per se, but are African descent or West Indian descent, or married to someone outside of the race. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm very familiar with that argument.
What do you make of that argument? You think there's any legitimacy to it?
I think the people who subscribe to that argument believe there's legitimacy, because they're literally talking about, like, president and vice president. They're talking literally about two people. So
the two Black people to reach the top of the echelon in the United States happen to be two people who are not direct descendants of American slaves.
I think first and foremost, there have been several people that are descendants of American slaves who were qualified for those positions.
Correct.
And for one reason or another, have not gotten to that point. But we have had plenty of congressional representatives and senators and whatnot that are descendants of African slaves, of American slaves.
But they ain't president.
Not president yet. I'm
vice president.
About getting any person of color to that will, be president once again, because with the way these white people are acting, they're like, yeah, you're not getting another one of these motherfuckers for a century with the way these folks are acting,
Right.
So it's one of these, like, wait and see for 100 years types of things. I would love to see that happen. But I do know that, like, yes, the Dr. Umars out there are definitely going to point to that. My thing is, it's almost like kind of the inverse of, like, diaspora wars. And so I don't see the point in pointing that out as much. But it is something interesting to think about.
Well, I think the argument that people like Dr. Umar and probably Dr. Boyce Watkins are pointing out when they are having conversations with other people who share similar ideas is that when we're fighting for rights in a particular marginalized group, you have to fight that fight on multiple fronts. And one of those fronts is economic. And I think one of the arguments that they have brought to the table more than once is, where is your money invested? Your money's invested in the areas that provide for your family. And so if your family is Black or of color or Asian or Persian or Jewish or whatever, you may spend more time at a Jewish market or an Asian market, or your money and resources is going to go back into your community. But when you're in an interracial partnership, and if that partner happens to be white, then your money is most likely going to go into the areas that white people spend their money in, which is in other white areas. And then how does that move the marginalized group forward economically when your resources are being invested elsewhere?
That theory also assumes that Black people all live around other Black people, which used to be the case.
Or shop around other Black people.
Yeah, and shop around other Black people. And that used to be the case. But now with mobile and digital and everything internet, I don't have to live around other Black people to spend money with Black people. I can find Black-owned businesses and spend money. I can find Black nonprofits and donate. I can find Black students that I want to specifically help them with their.
And you can do it online.
I can do all of that online. I can live in Canada. I can live in Mexico. I can live in France. True. I don't care. You know what I mean?
True.
And there's specific apps that will literally help you find Black-owned businesses.
Yes.
You're shopping for X thing. Here are the Black-owned businesses that have you do that. You know what I mean? I believe somebody's also recently launched something that literally on Amazon, you can find Black-owned Amazon sellers for shit.
Right.
But if we're talking 1950s, I get it. And I'm familiar with, Jarvis's whole thing where, the idea that back when we were more insular, the black dollar was circulated
went further. It circulated across more Black people than it does now after integrating, which was, again, economics, right? That was one of the strongest arguments when we were at Berkeley from more conservative Blacks that we came across or worked with that were of the ideology that interracial marriage is wrong for Black people, at least, and that circulating the dollar in the Black community and keeping it there was one of the priorities to, Black excellence and Black success. And not to say that there's not some truth to that, you know what I mean? But we've never won this fight alone. During the civil rights movement, it wasn't when we were getting eaten by dogs and beaten by the police and tortured and disappearing and being murdered. It was when the Allies started getting eaten by dogs and beaten by police and murdered.
Yeah, those 4 Jewish guys that got killed when they just came down to the South to help.
Right. I mean, and we've heard about that case, right? In every class from Here to Kingdom Come, you've heard about those guys. There's thousands of Black people lynched. There were thousands of Italians lynched that we'll never hear of. There's thousands of women who helped Black people that were lynched and raped and murdered that we'll never hear about. But we sure do hear about, the 3 mixed people who went. So without those allies, we cannot move the needle because there's not enough of us to move the needle on our own. We are only 12% of the American population, right? As people who identify solely as Black. The numbers of people who identify as 2 or more races has exploded.
Right.
So in the next 20 years, 40 to 50% of the population will identify as 2 or more races. But that doesn't mean that the racism itself and colorism itself will not still exist, because I could swing a Fendi bag and hit 3 white women who are going to tell me, I'm not racist, I have a Black husband, and yet they have no Black friends. They probably haven't helped any Black women at work, if not have actively tried to work against them. And just because you like Black dick doesn't mean you like Black people.
Woo!
And there's a huge
say that again.
And there's a huge distinction between the two. I mean, we're not even voting in the same interest of women, right? Like we saw, according to the polls, I think 40-something% of women voted for Trump, and that number went up in the second election. So we're not voting the same way. We're not looking at femininity the same way. We're not looking at feminism the same way. And we're not looking at the future of women the same way. And we're not looking at race the same way. But there are some fundamental facts that we all need to know. And so for that alone, I appreciate Harvard releasing the report, because at least it validates from an institution the people who don't understand these issues respect. At least it's coming from a voice they're willing to listen to.
Exactly, because this is coming on the heels of the 1619 Project, where many people tried to say, oh, well, the 1619 Project, you're just trying to insert race into everything. Because for people who don't know, the 1619 Project is about trying to look at how the legacy of slavery and how, not even the legacy, how slavery itself shows up throughout American history, both directly and indirectly, because literally the first slave ship that showed up here was in 1619. Okay. 1776 was still a long ways away.
Right.
You know what I mean?
A long ways away.
Yeah. So it's at the foundation, and people, and it was written by a Black woman. And so people say, oh, well, you're just out to get the whites. And people try to dismiss that. So it's good to see a school that, like it or love it, Harvard still has the name. Harvard is still Harvard. Right. So to see Harvard put this out in the name of truth, in the name of Veritas, which is their motto. That
is their motto, which is supposed to be transparency and truth.
Right. It supports what was done with the 1619 Project. It's cool to see that Brown was the first one to put this out, because a lot of idiots think of Brown, even though it is an Ivy League school, they think, oh, well, you go to Brown if you didn't get into Harvard or whatever. Or Brown is where, like East Coast hippies go.
Right, right. I mean? True.
So it's cool to see that they did this first. Because Brown is still an excellent university with a very long reputation. Brown is also, almost as old as Harvard. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? So it'll be interesting to see if many more Ivy League schools do this. I think if Harvard does it, Yale's got to do it. And if Yale does it, then Princeton's got to do it. But the thing is, I think Princeton probably has just as fucked up a past with this, if not more.
Absolutely, because Princeton attracted the Scots. And like I mentioned before, it was a group of Scottish men from the South that started the Ku Klux Klan at the heels of the loss of the Civil War. So there was a huge connection between the Scottish scholars, the racism that was bled into the curriculum, multi-curriculum, right? The medical curriculum, the law curriculum, the economic curriculum. I mean, remember, part of the reason business schools were built was because the industry of textile and merchandising was exploding. And why was it exploding? Because picking cotton had become the primary export for the colonies back in, bleeding off the backs of the plantations in the Caribbean and in the South, which was what were the primary exports? Tobacco. Cotton, I believe, was number one.
Sugar, cotton, tobacco. Yeah. International market for all of those things.
And black bodies. Right. So they needed a justification for keeping imagine how rich you would be if every day you had 100 people who just walked through the door and handed you bags of money.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't we all be rich?
And you handed them nothing.
And how Harvard actively participated in maintaining that by shaping the world and how people understood slavery through the curriculum of economics, medicine,
with literally
law, and science.
Seminary.
Absolutely.
Beginning with religion.
Right. So I applaud Harvard releasing these findings. Thank you for being honest. And at the same time, fuck you. I won't forgive it. I have no forgiveness in my heart for these people. I mean, I agree with Chris Rock when I think they asked him if he watches slave movies, and he says no, because they never really truly show you the horrors of what we went through. And we'll never truly understand the horrors of Black people being taken from their countries and put in a public zoo for people to study. You know, I'm not going to forgive this, because the whole time that these people were doing this, they were praying to the same Jesus they keep talking to us about. So I can't believe that those people know anything about the difference between right and wrong. And the more we study it, the more we understand that they actively participated in keeping this going. This wasn't something that people were like, well, I don't really know if I like this, but my neighbors do it, and this is just what we know. No, these people knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing, and they didn't care because they were making money. And that's fine. But knowing that, we have a responsibility ourselves as a group to take that same knowledge and accept these people for who and what they are, what they have shown us they are. I'm not going to look at people who have acted like this for 400 years and genuinely believe in my heart of hearts that they really want to see us as equals and share the wealth. I have no reason to believe that. There is no evidence to support that at this point.
And frankly, y'all just now got to that point of even saying those words about equality and shit like that. You've got 400 years of Americans acting a certain way, and then you have at absolute most, a 40 or 50-year history of white Americans saying, "Hey, maybe this isn't so good. Maybe we should let the Negroes have a little, equality and shit."
And that's fine.
Every single aspect, every single time, even the smallest bit of progress was made, it's always been met with an immediate pushback from so.
What did I tell you? We got Kamala and Ketanji, so we lost Will and Jada. There is always a sacrifice.
Re-emphasize the fact that slavery ended in Massachusetts in 1780 something, 1783?
Right. But Harvard was like, well, we'll have no part of that.
Yeah, no more slavery in Massachusetts, but Harvard and all these people are still making money off of slavery and using that money to grow Harvard. Okay, so they get to pat themselves on the back.
Right, and Harvard waited till the last minute to have to stop being. It's not like as soon as the law came out, they were like, no more. I mean, like they waited to the last second of the last moment of when they could and could not do this, and continued.
Right. Now, did they actually have slaves working at the school?
They worked on the campus.
There it is. And because it was Harvard, it's not like you could. So Massachusetts says no more slavery.
Owned.
If Harvard still has slaves after Massachusetts says there's no more slavery, do you think someone can call the cops and call the cops on Harvard to go, hey, we
you can't
have
because
some slaves.
it's the
That's
richest,
illegal now.
Well, it's the richest families that are funding Harvard. So they own the law enforcement who at that time are just overseers.
Nobody's gonna come in there and tell the slaves on the Harvard campus that they're free in 1783.
Yeah, and no one's gonna send them a letter, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to read it. So,
oh yeah, did we hear you Negroes were trying to learn how to read? They just kill you for that.
Right, for learning the alphabet, you could die.
Yeah,
and then you wonder why several generations later, education's not important to certain communities, and it's because they've had to learn to survive without it.
The fuck.
This ain't complicated.
And what's interesting to me is even when they finally like get rid of the last slave, and that's the other thing. You say they waited till the last minute. I'm pretty sure they still had, some maybe they didn't have them working on the Harvard campus, but some of the dean of Harvard or a professor or whatever, they probably still had slaves.
They had those motherfuckers still emptying the garbage cans. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah. And then
they were
beyond
washing
that,
the dishes.
they're all still making money off of slavery.
Everybody's making
for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
They're all still making money off slavery. The endowment's still making money off of slavery. People and they're accepting donations from people that are making money off of slavery. Yes. Even though slavery is no longer legal in Massachusetts, we all get to pat ourselves on the back.
Yes. And I think that attitude carries to this day. I mean, the most progressive cities the ones that claim to be progressive, like the San Franciscos, like the New Yorks, like the Chicagos, at the same time have the largest divide in land ownership and wealth between whites and blacks. So while they're preaching progress, they're not demonstrating it in their daily life. The real estate divide, the wealth divide is larger in the progressive states than anywhere else. San Francisco. How much is a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco? $4,000 at this point. You're telling me that pricing is for who? The marginalized groups? Who do you think lives there? People who are making that income and their colleagues. So you may not have actively divided yourself by race, but you did it economically, which is race anyway, because economically you will only allow your counterparts into those roles anyway, so that they get those salaries where they can afford to live next to you. That's the whole point.
And we can have a whole separate conversation about redlining, where Black folks who had sufficient means, who had sufficient credit, still were only allowed to buy homes in certain places. And then in those places, the government did not guarantee the loans, but everywhere else, the government guaranteed the mortgage loans. So that means the price of your house is going to go up because all these loans are federally guaranteed so that we can incentivize home ownership. But in these Black neighborhoods, the price is going to stay low. It's going to be depressed even relatively, because the government isn't guaranteeing the mortgages for homes in these neighborhoods specifically. You're literally putting a cap on wealth with Black people, and you're literally injecting steroids into wealth in white neighborhoods.
Right. I mean, this is a discussion that people who are proponents of true American history, or what has been hijacked as critical race theory, these are the conversations that they're asking us to have. It's not about saying who did what and pointing fingers. It's just looking at history and understanding how race bleeds into all the fabrics of it. Every country does that. I mean, Germany studies the Nazis. They don't act like it never happened. They study it so that we can understand why this is like not something we should really be doing. So the conversations are important. Having the conversations are important. Critically thinking about them is important. And again, like I said, I applaud Harvard for releasing their findings. I applaud Brown for releasing its findings. And at the same time, fuck them. They should just let every Black student in for free, to the outrage of everyone, I'm sure. But I mean, until they make active change, what difference does it even really make about this report? There is a family suing Harvard right now, an African-American family that's suing them because Harvard has photographs of one of their ancestors who was a slave And Harvard owns the photographs and the family wants them. And Harvard has not given the family the photographs and the lawsuit continues. So even though Harvard has the findings, it hasn't moved the needle on action.
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, fuck you, Harvard. But thanks for the report. It made for good reading. So here's the Harvard report. Gnaw on that for the next 6 months to a year. And while you talking heads are choking yourselves to death on discussing this, we're still going to continue collecting our money, our endowments. African-American acceptance will still be low. We're not giving up any buildings. We're not giving the bones back to any of the families. We haven't settled the lawsuit with the African-American family. We're not going to petition any of the museums to give back the jewelry and gold that was looted from
none of the
marginalized countries, because we're, looting is wrong and then taking things from other people is wrong because we're such a Christian society. No, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to give you a report. And by the time you're done fucking reading it, you'll be pissed about something else. And we're not even going to have to spend $1 on this.
Yeah. Here's the report. Now shut the fuck up about us.
Right. Here's your report.
Returning the shit that we stole from you. Shut the fuck up about us giving you back, giving you the rights to the pictures of your slavery, of your ancestors that we enslaved. Shut the fuck up about us changing the names of these schools. Shut the fuck up about Black people being admitted to Harvard. Shut the fuck up about everything else. We gave you the report.
Here's your report. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah. And
here's your report.
And one thing that we missed that we also wanted to include is we don't know the details of how these people were treated. They specifically did not talk about how many times these people were beat, how many, what are the different types of ways they were punished, how many sexual assaults, rapes, various things of that nature.
Unwed children born.
How many unwed
children born.
Yeah, and maybe you don't have the exact knowledge of every single one of those things, but you do, if you're digging deep enough, you can at least infer some things. They gave you general numbers of these are about how many people were enslaved, but no details about how they were treated.
Right. And we're not also getting any calculations on how much money specifically was made from these transactions. So where are the receipts? Like, yeah, we know you sold slaves and bought them. Like, we know that, thanks. We knew that before this report came out. What I'd like to know are the numbers. And everybody keeps numbers. They have those numbers. There's a ledger that school's had a bank account since its founding. Mm-hmm. So all you need to do is look through the files.
Yeah, what the fuck?
But we're not going to get that number because that number builds the argument for reparations.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Shut the fuck up about reparations. We gave you a
fuck up about reparations. So here, we'll throw you a bone and say, yes, our ancestors were racist and we benefited from it. And here's the report to prove it. You guys were right.
Whoop-de-doo.
So what? What?
Yeah. How do you get $53.2 billion? You start somewhere, and we know where you started. And we know you guys got a ledger on that shit.
Right.
We don't want to talk about that.
Right. So that I don't know if there were any receipts attached to the report, maybe in the appendix. I didn't see the original report.
There would be headlines if the number was out there. Somebody would have found it and they would have put it.
But that's dangerous to release those numbers because that is the foundation for reparations. Mm-hmm. And then every school would have to do it.
And they don't want that.
Right. And so far, I only know of Brown and Harvard releasing similar reports. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't think there's anything groundbreaking about it. I think all it does is confirm that it happened for those who only respect information from institutions like that, or from their, people from their own ilk. And it does give breadcrumbs to the reparations crowd. Mm-hmm. So they can gnaw on that bone for a minute. Right. And that still buys us time to not do anything.
Yeah. Exactly.
So things are consistent in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for joining us on Raw Food. Till next time, no artificial preservatives, flavoring, or color.